You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, nutrition, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere, anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your hosts, Dr. Justin Marchegiani and Barris Harvey, as they answer your burning health questions, as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Beyond Wellness Radio. And today's awesome podcast, we're interviewing Ben Greenfield. Now, Ben is a super productive, awesome person. He has so many different initials behind his name. So I'm going to try to condense his bio real quick. He's a coach, nutritionist, author, speaker, ex-bodybuilder, Ironman, Spartan racer, like every fitness thing you can think of, he's probably done it. In addition to that, he's the head coach and nutritionist for Pacific Elite Fitness. He is a consultant for Wellness FX. He is the host of the Get Fit Guy and the Ben Greenfield podcast on iTunes. And he also just released an awesome book called Beyond Training, not to get confused with our Beyond Wellness Radio. So, Ben, how's it going today?
Actually, I was totally ripping off you guys. That was like the whole scheme there was.
Nobody would ever know that, though. If anything, they'll think we're ripping you off. You're way more.
That's right. Actually, because
Smart.
my publisher is the same publisher that published Beyond Bacon, I have gotten that before. People are like, were you ripping off that book, Beyond Bacon? I'm like, no, I actually wasn't.
It's from the same people, so you guys are on the same team.
Yep.
So, first question, I noticed, you used to be an ex-bodybuilder. So what got you kind of into the kind of holistic kind of field? Because I know with bodybuilding, you read the muscle magazines, it's kind of just the generic kind of carb-loaded kind of thing. And the same thing with Ironman too, but what got you more into the holistic form of training?
Well, like bodybuilding is kind of a lot of bro science. Like you are definitely delving deeper into, especially like nutrition, everything from sodium loading to diuretics to a lot of research into supplements. And so like you kind of start to go down that road. Granted, bodybuilding does not look at things through the lens of performance combined with health, like I do in my book and like I do now, in my own training. But I think that between bodybuilding and then what I got into later, which is just the same thing, one of the nerdiest, geekiest sports on the face of the planet when it comes to like delving into the nutrition part of things, and that's triathlon. Like between those two, that really got me into looking more deeply into the science of performance more than just like, smashing yourself with workouts. So, I think that the reason for that, again, is that bodybuilding, there's such a nutrition bent in order for you to get from 15 down to 10% body fat, let's say, as a dude, you could do that by just working out hard and by kind of following your diet. But then for you to drop from like, let's say 10% down to 3%, you got to pull out a lot of stops. Like
basically, you're like, those are like the OG kind of biohackers, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so like the same thing for triathlon. It's like, in triathlon, you could go out and do like a sprint triathlon and do pretty good by just having done some pretty tough workouts. But then once you get up into Ironman and it becomes a sport of attrition, where if you run out of muscle glycogen and liver glycogen, you're pretty much screwed, then, that becomes a little bit more of like a nutrition science sport. So bodybuilding and triathlon shoved me kind of deeper down into the tunnel of nutrition, supplements, and the deeper science of performance. And then going into that got me more into self-quantification. Going into self-quantification began to help me realize that, hey, even though we're going fast and we've got lots of muscle or we're getting good results in races or whatever, we're not actually healthy when you look at cholesterol parameters or inflammatory parameters and stuff like that. And then that kind of got me into like the whole holistic thing of kind of taking into account everything from sleep to nutrient density to digestibility of foods to biohacking to everything that I kind of focus on now. But I mean, when you look at stress fractures, for example, that's a pretty common occurrence, especially in female endurance athletes, as part of what's called the athletic triad, which is basically an eating disorder, and that's combined with amenorrhea and osteoporosis. So typically, like if we look at those in detail in a female endurance athlete, that first component, eating disorder, that returns to what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Like you just need to eat more damn food. Like so many, like let's use this example of like this whole ketogenic diet thing. Like so many women are like, oh, I'm going to do this ketogenic diet to lose weight. That's not really a weight loss diet. And a lot of times, like carbohydrate restriction especially drops so low on that diet that women kind of shoot themselves in the foot when it comes to creating basically like either nutrient depletion or carbohydrate depletion by focusing so much on this ketogenic diet, when all they really need to focus on is just eating a lot of food when they're hungry, if they're like a hard charging female endurance athlete, and trying to skew a lot of it towards fat, but not focusing on like the ketosis per se. When you look at the next part, amenorrhea, in most of the cases of like female athletes, it's usually due to pregnenolone steal and low progesterone from too much of cholesterol and steroid precursors getting shuttled towards cortisol formation. And so in the case of that, it's a combination of eating a lot of fat, getting a lot of vitamin D, eating a lot of calories, period, and then focusing on decreasing cortisol using some of those methods that I talked about earlier. The other part of this, osteoporosis, when you look at that, a lot of times it's just straight up mineral depletion. So what I mean by that is, when you're constantly perspiring through your inspiration and expiration, and also through your sweat, if you are eating a standard, fruit and vegetable based diet, just because of the leaching of minerals from modern farming practices, you're not getting typically as many minerals as are necessary to help you out with bone density. And so, most female endurance athletes, in addition to decreasing cortisol, increasing fat intake, increasing overall calorie intake, I usually really encourage the use of like sea salt, mineral supplementation, things of that nature to help out with things from that standpoint. So those are some of the big wins when you look at that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I wanted to kind of go onto a tangent for a bit. We're talking about some of the metabolic processes, and now I wanted to kind of shift over because I hear you talk a lot about endurance, because you're an endurance sport athlete, of course, but you have such a wealth of knowledge. And one thing that I've only heard you talk briefly about is more of the fast twitch kind of athletes. And now that you're kind of shifting into the Spartan racing, I know that might play in a little bit more. So a question that I wanted to go into, some of the sports performance kind of thing, is what are some of the best ways to improve speed? I know speed is one of those things that people just say, you're kind of born with it. You either have it or you don't. Can you possibly increase your speed like a significant amount, like someone can increase their strength or their mass?
Oh yeah, I mean, you can absolutely increase your speed, but really the biggest thing, or the biggest kind of like misconception that I find, is that people they tend to focus on more like kind of like 400, 800 meter distance, 1 to 2 minute efforts for speed, very glycolytic efforts, when really like speed is more about, it's about almost like patience when you're trying to tap into that phosphogenic energy pathway that relies primarily upon the splitting of creatine phosphate for very short efforts that are, usually under 20 seconds in duration and at a very, very high turnover. So when it comes to training speed, we're talking about short, quick efforts with low amounts of resistance or force that you're working against, with very long recovery periods. And that's hard for a lot of just like exercise enthusiasts to wrap their heads around, because when you're trying to get fitter or faster, you just think you got to be huffing and puffing and breathing hard and feeling the burn the whole time, when in fact there's no hydrogen ion accumulation when you're tapping into your creatine phosphogenic pathway. There's very little fatigue from like a musculoskeletal standpoint when you're primarily just taxing your neuromuscular system, and it's just a totally different type of workout. So what I mean by that is like a speed workout might be that you're doing, a set of depth jumps, maybe some single leg plyometrics and some quick, very, very short overspeed treadmill or downhill repeats. And it's really not that taxing of a workout. You're just focusing on from a metabolic standpoint. It's taxing from a nervous system standpoint, but not a metabolic standpoint. So you're basically just trying to increase turnover, decrease ground contact time, and increase your ability to tap into that phosphogenic pathway. And it's a style of exercise that's commonly neglected. I mean, even when you look at it from like a professional sports level, I'll see still a lot of coaches, like strength conditioning coaches, saving these type of workouts for like when the day's metabolic conditioning is over. When in fact, and I talk about this in my book, like if you want to get faster, if you want to get fast feet, if you want to get fast nerves, if you want to get quick reaction time, you do that stuff when you're fresh, and preferably also when your reaction time peaks during the day, which is typically between 4 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon. And that's kind of tough logistically to pull off for a lot of athletes. But what it means is you're going to save your working out until the afternoon. You're not going to go into a speed workout fatigued, and you're going to prioritize speed before you move into any metabolic conditioning. So if you're looking at this from like, let's say like, we're right in the middle of like the World Cup soccer. So, or we're leading up to it. So let's say that like a soccer team is prepping for something like this. Well, ideally what they would do is they go in, you do your warm up, you do your foam rolling, then you do all your speed protocols, and then you move on into your metabolic conditioning and scrimmage and practice and that type of thing. So it's just kind of a matter of priority and a matter of knowing the right way to stack your sets and your reps, and then make sure that you do speed with a low amount of resistance. So typically, if you're doing speed protocols, you shouldn't be using any more than 10% of your total body weight. So if I'm going to go out and do, let's say like squat jumps for speed, then I'm 180 pounds. So I might be using, at most the bar, and that's it. So, so speed is an interesting animal. I think a lot of folks kind of misunderstand how to train it properly.
So everybody out there listening, don't throw on a 40-pound weight vest and at the end of your workout try to run the entire football field.
Yeah, that's not speed. I mean, that's all metabolic conditioning. Yeah.
Interesting. Good points, Ben. How do you incorporate some of Jay Schroeder's work with the, explosive dynamic isometrics or altitude drops or even just isometric training? How do you incorporate that into your workout routine?
So the cool thing about electrostim, especially when you combine it with isometrics, is that you build up crap loads of lactic acid in the muscle tissue. So you get a bunch of hydrogen ion buildup, and you build up your enzyme buffering capacity big time. And you're able to do it without joint impact and without some of the things that would tend to cause a bigger release in cortisol, longer recovery implications, et cetera. So I personally use those type of protocols, even though Jay works with like professional football players, for example. I use those protocols for enhancing endurance. Like I trained 8 to 10 hours last year for Ironman, qualified for Ironman World Championships, and had some of my best races ever. And I was doing a Jay Schroeder-esque protocols twice a week, meaning that I would get into an isometric position, like a squat, like a wall squat against the wall. And I would have electrodes. In this case, I just use a unit called the Compex unit, because the ARP wave unit that Jay uses and that you use, Justin, it's kind of expensive for just like the general population to grab. So I would hook up that Compex unit and just put it at a pretty high electrostim setting, and just basically feel the burn for 5 minutes, and you'd finish up one of those sessions and feel like you'd run like 2 hours. So you get this lactic acid buffering capacity that just goes through the roof. And one of the reasons for that is when you're in an isometric position, you are not milking lactic acid out of your tissues at all. It's just accumulating. Like there's very, very little occurring that, like if you're riding a bike and you keep the pedals turning over, like that's one of the things that I tell like the triathletes that I coach, like you never glide, you never cruise on the bike. Like you always pedal, even when you're going downhill. So you're always milking metabolic byproducts out of the tissue. And when you're in an isometric position and you're holding a joint in a specific position, that doesn't happen. And the cool thing is that even though it hurts like hell because it's burning, you really are building up a really good buffering capacity when you do something like that. So, I mean, you can do just isometrics, but when you add the electrostim in, it just gives this compounded effect that is great for squeezing a lot of training into a short period of time. And I got to the point where when I would travel through airports, like I would duck into like don't tell any of like the folks in the airport with kids this, but I would duck into like the family restroom and just like hook up the electric. And I would do like 15, 20 minute protocols where I do like a push up hold, squat hold, and lunge hold with the electrostim added. And, then I travel with these little action wipes so I can wipe off the sweat and everything when I finish. And, I could be traveling internationally and get like a killer workout in doing something like that. So I like it as a biohack to really tap into a ton of fitness in a short period of time.
That's great. And for everyone listening at home, that's Ben goes into detail on that topic right there in chapter 4 of his book. So if you want more information, feel free and check that out. And what do you think about the lactic acid providing a growth hormone stimulus? What's your take on growth hormone and lactic acid?
I haven't seen a lot of research on lactic acid and growth hormone stimulus, so I can't really speak to that. What have you seen?
I mean, Charles Poliquin talks about that in a lot of his training where, and I think Doug McGuff has mentioned some stuff, creating that lactic acid does provide a strong growth hormone stimulus. I've seen that in a handful of places. I'm just not sure if you had any personal experience with that.
You did have an interview with forgetting his last name, it was Peter with NASA, and he has the Vasper systems, and it's it's kind of that idea of like holding the lactic acid into place while you're doing the exercise to release more growth hormone. So,
well, it's interesting because one of the other things that can increase lactic acid buildup is like a short hypoxic state. Mm-hmm. And there is some pretty good evidence out there for hypoxia-based induction of DHEA and growth hormone. And I actually do that in my recovery days. Every Wednesday, I do a hypoxic session in the pool where I'll do 20 repeats of underwater swimming for as long as I can go, holding my breath until I literally am about to pass out. And it's very, very low impact. Like it's like you recover from that workout super duper quick. The only thing that's really taking a hit is your lungs. But I do that because of that research I've seen on DHEA and growth hormone release related to hypoxia. So yeah, it's possible that a big part of that is because of the increased lactic acid that accumulates in the presence of low oxygen.
Interesting. Yes. And can that have a similar effect with EPOC, like after your exercise, when you get into that state where you're kind of like really reaching for your breath, that type of exercise, post-exercise oxygen consumption, can that have a similar stimulus?
I don't know, because that it's a different feeling. Like like just like breathing hard after your workout, it's a different feeling than what I would consider to be true hypoxia, where it's like, like going blue in the face, holding your breath type of thing. Probably a closer analogy to that would be like using, for example, like an elevation training mask during a workout, or using like I've got a device out in my garage called a hypocxico, which decreases the partial pressure of oxygen in the air and you can like put it next to a bicycle or a treadmill and it will simulate you exercising like 18 to 20,000 feet. And the interesting thing about that is it's kind of hypoxia, but it's also decreased partial pressure of oxygen. So you also get increased production of erythropoietin, so which is a red blood cell precursor. So that's kind of a cool little toy to have around if you want to say compete at altitude or increase your blood's oxygen carrying capacity.
Yeah, and speaking of hypoxia training, you talked about the elevation mask, which I guess technically isn't really doesn't change the partial pressure like the other device you have, but kind of is more of a resistant breath kind of training thing. So I have one of those and also a power lung, but I've been using it during some of my practices, during some football practice, running routes in the beginning, and actually getting pretty fatigued quickly at first, but it makes training without it so much easier. Could you talk a little bit more about, because I think that's an easy first step for people because it's not that expensive. Like I think it's $80 or $60, something like that. Can you talk about the elevation mask and how you might use it in your training?
Yeah, the elevation mask, like you say, it's just resisted breathing. Really, it's not reducing the partial pressure of oxygen. You're just kind of having to breathe through a smaller hole. It's like breathing through a straw. So there are a variety of applications for something like that. I mean, my favorite way to use it is to just I don't do as many short, quick exercise sessions with it as much as I will ruck with it, meaning I'll put on a weight vest or a weighted backpack and do a hard hike in the hills wearing the elevation training mask. Mm-hmm. And the thing I like about that is I can take my kids with me, take my kids out on a hike. And whereas normally going on a hike with your kids, my kids are 6, that'd be really easy, but it turns into a hard workout. The other thing that I like to use it for, because I'm really focusing on slow controlled breathing anyways during this, is yoga. Just because I find that it takes something like yoga and turns it into a little bit more metabolically demanding type of routine. So I've used it for that. There's a lot of people that like to use it for, kind of like you're doing, like running routes or, doing like a burpee based workout or kettlebell swing, stuff like that. The only issue I've found with that is sometimes I have trouble focusing on quality of form when I feel like I'm going blue in the face. And maybe that's why I like doing it better with things that don't require as much quality attention paid to biomechanics. But, if you're able to maintain good biomechanics and good running form and all that jazz while you're using it, then, it's definitely got some application there too.
Yeah, definitely when the form starts to go down, it's like, all right, let me take this off of my face so I can breathe and actually focus a bit. And same thing with like a weighted vest, which is probably not that much heavier, just like a 12 to 15 pound kind of thing, just for some added resistance. But yeah, definitely, like you said, not to kind of throw you off and just start making your form horrible, because then you'd be actually going backwards and training yourself to do the wrong things.
Yeah.
And Ben, I also see you write a lot about doing a lot of your endurance work, but you're going into ketosis. And I noticed that you said that you can keep your carbs even upwards of 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrate and still be in ketosis. And most people, if they're familiar with ketosis, that's basically your body burning more fat for fuel. And typically, like in an Atkins type of world, that's keeping your carbs below 20. But Ben has experience keeping his carbs much higher. Can you talk more about that?
Well, yeah, it's just this paradox between trickle-down health information coming from people who might be, no offense, wandering around Whole Foods doing yoga, 3 times a week versus people who are out there really exercising hard. Like my experience primarily, like my background is working with athletes, with people who are really going out there and doing some pretty tough stuff, in many cases, most days of the week. And when you look at somebody like that who is going through that amount of energy, they can get away with a lot more than the average person can when it comes to things like carbohydrate intake or even total calorie intake. And when I do blood and breath ketone monitoring, when I'm in the throes of Ironman training, I can maintain ketosis on a very high level of carbohydrate intake because I'm simply using all that carbohydrate very rapidly for formation of ATP. And elevations in blood glucose really are pretty slight, just because glucose is disappearing from the tissue so quickly when you're exercising, especially if your primary carbohydrate intake is coming during periods of time when you have a really high upregulation of non-glucose dependent insulin or non-insulin dependent glucose transporter pathways, meaning that you're really, not putting much of a strain on the pancreas. Glucose is getting shoved into muscle tissue or liver tissue very, very quickly because you're exercising and because you're very insulin sensitive. And so when you look at a situation like that, I mean, you can even get as high as 200 grams of carbohydrates on a tough day. And, the understanding there is that, depending on like the training program that you're doing and what you're eating during exercise, sometimes half to 3/4 of that is just stuff that you're taking in during exercise to support, the day's fueling. And, in a situation like that, there's very little happening in terms of elevations in blood glucose, and you can still stay in a very concentrated form of ketosis. And, all the more so if you're using things like medium chain triglycerides and things that are going to keep ketones elevated.
Interesting. Great. I'm going to switch gears here for a second because Ben does a lot of work with functional medicine. He works with Wellness FX, blood panels, and does consulting, I think, across the country, international.
Well, I work primarily online. So yeah, like I do most of my consults via Skype and over the phone.
That's cool. And in Ben's book, he talks about parasites, and he talks about the experience of him getting 1 or 2 different parasite infections. Can you go into that and how that affected your performance?
Well, parasites primarily where you see that, of course, as you'd expect, would be on a bowel performance level. But you can also, like for example, I did a competition in Thailand where I got a parasite from some of basically the stagnant water that we swam in Thailand. And initially it manifested itself as just a little bit of diarrhea and some bowel upset. But then long term, I had some floral imbalances, some issues with constipation about every 2 weeks, like clockwork, as these things hatch inside of you. You get insomnia. And so there's some pretty nasty things that happen. And interestingly, I test a lot of triathletes, especially, and a lot of them wind up with parasites related to fresh water, like the type of parasites that you'd find in fresh water, or water-dwelling parasites. And I think that, a lot of times when you're looking at gut issues, leaky gut, stomach problems, bloating, poor sleep, those type of things that you tend to see a lot of times in athletes, and in this case for triathletes, in a lot of cases, it can be a parasitic issue. And there are different things that you can use. In my case, I used a Chinese herbal extract that was primarily a base of berberine and the Ayurvedic herb complex triphala, and that was and has been pretty efficacious for me for knocking out a parasite. But yeah, it's definitely an issue. And, I don't think that all parasites are bad. There's definitely that whole healthy hygiene hypothesis that suggests that, some amount of dirt and germs and bacteria and viruses and even parasites help to strengthen the immune system. But I think that there are some that, if you're very symptomatic with bowel issues and insomnia and stuff like that, that's a parasite you should probably think about getting rid of.
Absolutely. And I work with patients all over the world as well. And I see good amount of these parasite infections, they don't even have gut symptoms along with it, which is pretty crazy. I mean, just seeing brain fog or hormonal issues or just lower performance, because they can just be that kind of silent energy suck out of your adrenal glands where it just lowers that cortisol, decreases your ability to recover, kind of drains down your sex hormones a little bit. And that's interesting that you had that in your book and then you had an experience with it. Very cool.
Yeah.
That's when I first met you. Is you were on that herbal extract. It looked like you had some pudding there to take that bad boy away.
Yeah. It's because parasites can cause some gut inflammation. I think in that case I was using the who is it that makes that? It's the Inflamex meal replacement.
That's Metagenics.
It's very, very good for people with Crohn's and irritable bowel. Yeah, Metagenics. Yeah. The Metagenics Inflamex is good. Thorne has one called Metaclear, I think.
Yep.
But yeah, those are good. They're good for travel too. A lot of people get stressed out. This happens to me sometimes when I travel. I'll get constipated. Traveling with some kind of a meal replacement blend that you use for most of your meals can help out quite a bit in situations like that, where you're just basically kind of not going near airplane food or airport food or even hotel food at all. And you just travel with these meal replacement blends, and you roll into Starbucks and you ask them for a cup of some water and you dump it in there and stir it up with a plastic spoon. And I'll do that 3 times a day when I'm traveling now. And it helps out quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really smart move. All right. Last question. Overtraining. Now, this is something that comes up big, but at the same time, we have people that are CrossFitters that we work with that are pretty damn good at their sport, and they do like 2-a-days. Now, with the world of the nutraceuticals and some of the access to food that we have, is there a way that you can, I guess, push the envelope and possibly do something like a 2-a-day? Say, I know this is something that we do as football athletes. I might do a 2-a-day, but CrossFitters and whatnot, are there ways to kind of improve recovery? I think would be the main point, not necessarily to, I know people sell these pre-workouts. I think what's more important is the recovery portion. Is there a way that you think that you can get by doing 2-a-days, at least for a short period of time, to increase performance for a sport?
Oh yeah. I mean, like I do 2-a-days with a lot of my clients. We do in the morning when parasympathetic nervous system is a little bit, it's a little bit better branch of the nervous system to go after. We do like easy aerobic movement protocols, a lot of yoga. We'll do foam rolling, inversion, just like a lot of the stuff that's a little bit more like deep restorative exercise. And then the hard Metcon stuff, high intensity interval training and weight training, we do later in the day. And that works out really well. I think that a 2-a-day that includes hard training that's very sympathetic nervous system based earlier in the day is stressful. I've done it before. I've gone to camps. I'll be at SEAL Fit camp this August, and we'll be, I can guarantee we'll be getting up early in the morning and like hitting the grinder with, drill sergeants yelling in our faces in the mornings. And like, I don't think that that's good for the body or the adrenals long term. I think that it can, one of the reasons I'm doing is because it makes you tough short term and it prepares you for stress short term. But I think that long term as a habit to do hard morning workouts, I don't think that's an ideal scenario. I think that the human body does best slowly waking up, and getting that parasympathetic nervous system activation and training the body for parasympathetic dominance in the morning, and then doing more of the fight and flight stuff later on in the day.
Sounds awesome.
Good stuff. So everyone that's listening here, if you want to get more information about some of Ben's work and his best time New York selling book, Beyond Training, feel free and check that out on Amazon. Ben, tell us about some of your sites, your blogs, YouTube channels, your coaching stuff. Where can our listeners get access to that stuff?
Yeah, I do a lot of blogging and podcasting over at bengreenfieldfitness.com. And that's a good place to go to just check out the articles that I write and the audio recordings that I do about twice a week, and just basically kind of tap into some of the stuff that I'm talking about. I'm, constantly trying to research the best ways to optimize performance and fat loss and health. And so that's a good place to go, is bengreenfieldfitness.com.
Thanks so much, Ben. We appreciate you coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com/question. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.